and welcome to all of you for joining us for Across the Benches, which is a political discussion with, we suspect, a bit of a difference, because we're going to try to be positive and find out what we might agree on. Instead of politics being some kind of zero-sum game where the media and politicians take positions and try and play gotcha, let's find out maybe what might bring us together. The challenge for our first two independent-minded guests, Labour MP Jess Phillips and Conservative MP Maria Miller, is to see how we can perhaps also improve the tone of politics by thinking about what we can agree on. And for those of you who think we're all going to join hands and sing John Lennon's Imagine, it's going to be, I hope, a little bit more hard-headed than that. The divisions between us are fairly obvious. To take one example, in the 2015 general election, each of the parts of the United Kingdom voted for a different big party. It was the SNP in Scotland, the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland, it was Labour in Wales, and the Conservatives in England. So could we agree that perhaps the system isn't quite working as well as it should, and maybe there's ways of improving it? Maria Miller is the Conservative MP for Basingstoke since 2005 and is chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee. Jess Phillips won Birmingham Yardley for Labour in 2015 and is Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding. Welcome to you both. Maybe we could ask you both, actually, beginning with Maria, what brought you into politics in the first place? What was it? Was it an issue? Was it you just felt you had to join a party? How did you get involved?
Gavin, it was very simple. I went to university from my comprehensive school in South Wales, and I found actually there were very few people like me there. Most of the people had gone to a grammar school or they'd gone to a private school, and there were actually at the LSE, which is where I went, almost no other women who were born in a council house, gone to their comprehensive school and come from South Wales. And it was that sort of sense of inequity and the need to give people opportunity, which really got me involved in the Conservative Party at university and then really throughout my life. But it was only until much later on that I actually decided to stand for election and did a job in the real world first.
Jess, what got you into it? Do you see with Maria sort of echoes from your own background?
Yeah, so I don't come from South Wales, although to be fair, in Birmingham it's basically like it's an hour away, and we just go there all the time. So, the reason I decided to get involved, I was always really deeply political. I can't pretend that I didn't have a political upbringing. I had a very, very political upbringing. But it was whilst I was working at Women's Aid, really, that I thought I was going to sort of try. And first of all, it was the local council, because I saw decisions being made about how money would be spent, priorities that would be made. And I'd go to local meetings about crime and justice, and it would always be about, it would never ever be about women's safety. And I think I've got thousands of people coming through the doors every day, and nobody's talking about this in these meetings about criminal justice. And so I thought I'd better get on the council and be a person who talks about it and make sure that proper funding gets around. And then I realised that obviously the council is hamstrung by lots of the policies and things that come from on high, and housing and welfare and things like that are largely decided in Westminster. So I thought, well, I better go there then. Better just keep going up until you get someone who listens and you can actually change the things you wanted to do.
Maria, that's what you do have in common for a start, which is you did want to change things. You wanted more opportunity for people, and maybe there's an elision between the two things you want to change, but it was about bringing change. And then you have to join a political party, and actually otherwise you can't change things. Is that basically it? Or it's very difficult to change things?
Gavin, I think it's really difficult to have a strong voice outside of a political party. I mean, there's some notable examples of people who have achieved that, but by and large, being part of a political party, a party that obviously you share the values of, gives you an opportunity to have a stronger voice. And so I decided to join the Conservative Party absolutely, because when I was 14, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, and I thought, wow, this is a person who actually has brought politics into something which I can understand. She talked in English language. She didn't talk in code, and she brought it to life for me. And I think probably in hindsight as well, the fact she was a woman really was an important part of that sort of political journey as well. So yeah, it's when she became Prime Minister that I really felt the Conservative Party had something for me and had something on offer, and the ability to be able to challenge the status quo as well, because of course it was Margaret Thatcher that did so much for people like my family, giving the opportunity of right to buy, and to give them a leg up out of lives which were very poor. I mean, my grandfather was in hospital because he was suffering from starvation when he was a child. This is in Bilston, which is an area that Jess knows well, and that's why she often thinks I'm quite sort of in comparison with her quite poor, actually. She's the posh half.
Yeah,
well, let's go over to the posh member. For
nothing posh about Bilston Market, I tell you that for nothing.
Yeah. But I mean, you obviously went different ways. But Margaret Thatcher is the sort of one sentence definition that she mentioned at the start, which was, I'm a grocer's daughter from Grantham. That was something that did that have some resonance to you as well, Jess, even though you're obviously very different?
I think it's very difficult to say, and as Maria said, in hindsight, the fact that she was a woman, I think I could look back in hindsight. I certainly didn't feel that was the case at the time, because I was raised in a very, very, very anti-Thatcher family. In fact, I'd say my main political memories are the sort of the vitriol against some of the things that she was doing. But my nan used to come round and it was when Prime Minister's Questions then was on a Thursday, not a Wednesday, and my nan used to come round on a Thursday to do the ironing and peel potatoes, even though no one had requested this of her. But she used to be like, it was basically a sideways glance at my working mother. And my nan used to watch PMQs and stand and shout at the television, and I used to sit at her feet while she was ironing, watching it. And I suppose as a little girl, it must have, there must be some element of seeing a woman in politics that sunk in. I certainly didn't feel that way at the time, but I can't help but think that must be the case. To be a child born under Thatcher, and to be so overtly political, but see that you are represented in that way. I can't say I ever looked at her and thought she was particularly like me, but that is because of the attitudes of the people around me. But yeah, it would be crass to suggest that it wouldn't have had any effect. I imagine that it must have done, especially because it was at the sort of foot of my dinner lady nan, and she was being deeply political whilst doing the ironing. She was talking about politics and shouting at the television while this woman was having a row. So yeah, there's no doubt that will have seeped in.
In terms of joining a party and getting to Parliament, Maria, I mean, is Parliament particularly welcoming to newcomers? Is it? And because of the party system, which you both said you have to do that to try to affect change. I mean, isn't that also quite constricting? Because this stuff, I'm not going to go into what you don't like about, individual policies, but there must be sometimes you think, well, I wouldn't actually do that way if it was me, but I'm kind of got to go along with it. And I'm sure that's true of anybody in a political party.
Well, I mean, so you ask, what was it like to join Parliament? Was it welcoming? I mean, I joined Parliament in 2005, so a little bit before Jess. And I have to say, I was in shock for a year. I used to come home and my husband said, but didn't you know it was going to be like this? And what I found so shocking was that the lack of women. I've worked in advertising and marketing for 20 years, and all my bosses and all my clients have been women. And so I had been very used to that sort of makeup of the workplace. in my party, and it wasn't that different in the Labour Party. It was a little bit better, but not as good as it is now. You know, there were 18 women in my party when I joined, and the joke was there were sort of so many people called Anne that the Speaker just used to call us all Anne, which was fine. I mean, I like the name Anne, but it's not my name. So it was I don't think anybody was unwelcoming, but it wasn't a natural habitat for somebody who was had worked in advertising and marketing for 20 years. But it's a lot better now. I think in terms of, you know, is it constricting being part of a party? Well, I think that's to misunderstand the way Parliament works. The vast majority of our working life as parliamentarians is spent in committees, where select committees. I mean, Jess and I were in a select committee, and I should actually point out, Gavin, that I'm no longer the chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee. I'd like to call myself the founding chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee. That's actually now Caroline Noakes. But we work together an awful lot. We work together in select committees. We work together to try and put forward amendments to legislation. You know, we work together a lot in all-party parliamentary groups. It's you know, Jess and I have had sharp words on the floor of the House of Commons, but you know, actually, for the most part, we all work collaboratively, and I think that is actually Parliament at its best.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that you don't see any of the very, very little, even when you watch a select committee, it is usually the bits that people watch and the bits that people see is us being difficult for the people sat in front of us, whether that's businessmen or ministers. It still seems a little bit adversarial, but the vast majority of even though it's all parties being similarly adversarial towards the person in front of them, you don't get to see the huge amount of conversational politics that goes on, even between people like me and the ministers, the government ministers from the opposite party. You know, before I go hell for leather on having a campaign to get something done, I don't start at hell for leather. I start by picking up the phone and being like, I really think you should do this. And they're like, oh, we'll get back to you. There's usually a little bit of argument. And then they're like, well, it's not going to happen. And then I'm like, right, well, then you leave me no choice. So I'm going to have to go and do a campaign. But usually those campaigns that you do, they are usually with people from other parties, including the party that is opposing your idea. And that is as adversarial as it can seem when you see like group of MPs demand this of government. Even that is just part of the process of getting things over the line in politics. Is much less adversarial than it appears. And the idea that being in a political party hampers that. Also, I think it's worth saying as well that you don't have to be in a political party or be a frontline politician to affect political change. There is huge amounts that ordinary folks and campaigners and lots of the things, the campaigns, for example, that Marie and I might have worked together on, they come from things like the Girl Guides. They come from a group of ordinary citizens coming to see us and talking to us about their issue. And we can't exist without those people coming to us. But a political party will only hamper you up until the point where, you know, there might be a line in the sand. And in most cases, in lots and lots of cases, maybe not most, people are willing to act against their own political party on something that they really, really, really believe in. But usually you don't have to get to that point because there is so much that goes on before that.
Well, can I add something to that, Gavin? It's because there was actually a campaign that I worked very hard on to get relationship and sex education made mandatory in schools. Successive governments for 17 years had not been able to get it over the line, despite the amazing work of organisations outside of Parliament. And it was actually a coalition of 37 MPs from every single party, which David Burrows, who was then an MP, and I got together, and we got the government to change their mind. So it was actually a coalition between different parts of my own party as well. And it's that sort of work that can make a real difference. I guess it helped that it was a coalition. It wasn't the coalition government. Sorry, it was the Theresa May government. So we hadn't got much of a majority to overturn.
Yeah, that definitely helped, I've got to say. In the overturning the government to do things, it definitely helped when there wasn't much of a majority, because everybody's vote mattered much more. Your vote would matter as much as the Prime Minister's, and it's sometimes more so, and they desperately needed your voice on things. So that definitely did help, but that still definitely happens.
Well, maybe that's one thing we should. I'll make a note. Try to get as close to a hung parliament as possible.
Oh God, I can't say that I necessarily enjoyed it all that much.
Well, I'm sure no. But to go back a little bit, because when you said, Jess, about how we both said how much of what you do is kind of collegiate and across party lines, and I'm thinking, well, yes, and I can imagine also that in those political any kind of cross-party meetings, people in my profession are looking for the bit where you do argue and drawing a distinction between you, right? And I was just before we began this, I was saying to Maria, I can only think of one senior politician. It was David Miliband, who, when Foreign Secretary, said he didn't know to the answer to one question I asked him on Newsnight. And it struck me then that that's because, and we talked afterwards, it's because in so many cases, if you as a politician say you don't know about something, somebody like me says, what do you mean you don't know? You're an MP or you're Foreign Secretary. How come you don't know about Libya? So is there something about not just the social media culture, but about the media culture, which makes it more obvious when you disagree that it's actually puts a little bit of poison in the system, Maria? Or is that just I suppose, the sea in which you have to swim? That's the way things are.
Gavin, I would say that things have changed slightly. I'm not sure that there is quite that culture now. I think people are more likely to admit they don't know everything. I mean, it was the best piece of advice I was ever given by a colleague, which was to say that, as a member of parliament, you'll be asked so many questions, you simply don't know the answer to all of them, and don't pretend you do. And I think that culture's somewhat changing, maybe because of social media, where there is a sort of that bombarding of questions, and sometimes you simply don't know the answer. I think probably the other observation I'd make is that that's probably something which is true of ministers rather than backbench members of parliament. I mean, having been a cabinet minister, and at this point I will point out I was the 38th woman to ever be made a cabinet minister. We are still so woefully short of women who've ever been in the cabinet. And you are expected by the media to know the answer, and that is tough, and that is incredibly stressful, and can't possibly be true. And that makes it even more stressful that you're in a situation you could be asked on anything and you may not know the answer to it. So I think as backbenchers, we probably get away with an awful lot more than that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think it would be really not, whether it, like you're saying, I don't know the answer to that, it's not for me to say the answer to that, is something that happens rarely. What happens even more rarely, I think, is ministers being able to come out and say, we tried something and it didn't work, because immediately everybody goes, you turn, whether it's the opposition, your political opposition, or the media, and also goes out and sells a policy on some of the things that might be bad about it as well. Like, this isn't going to be perfect. Everything has to be sold as if it's world beating and this is the best thing in the whole world. And I think that a greater honesty could break out where people could say, there are going to be downsides, but we've got to try and tackle this. And there needs to be a little bit more of that, I think, that goes on. Because do you know what? I think that the public like it. I think that the public prefer to be spoken to and treated as adults who can tolerate things, and also not expecting everybody to be happy about something. I think you have to you learn very, very quickly, especially if you fight a marginal seat where it seems like every vote counts. I literally drove somebody in Labour to a polling station, so it feels like, you know, you'll get, you know, my seat wasn't Labour when I took it. It's a safe seat now, she says smugly, but the truth is it's hard to learn that you can't please everybody, and learn the manner in which you can't please everyone, especially if your political opponents immediately will attack you on any sort of infraction. And that, I think, definitely there could be a breakout of that sort of honesty, like, we're going to try this and it might not work, but we can't carry on with the GCSEs happening the way that they do, or we can't carry on with you know, whatever it is the subject of the day is. But that doesn't happen. Everything has to be sold as being like, you know, the golden pastures in the future, and it's the reason people get disenchanted with politics, because they're told it's going to be golden, and when they get there, it's at best bang average.
Yeah, Maria, I mean, and it's also true that if you do get groups of people together of different views and talk to them, it is possible to reach a reasonable consensus with nobody thinking, well, it'll be perfect. I mean, that's how the rest of our life works. But
yes, but I'd also point out to you that for many people who particularly are on social media, and most politicians now, if not all politicians, are on social media, trying to you know, see the wood for the trees can be very difficult.
Yeah.
The echo chamber that is social media can make it appear as if one view is significantly more prevalent than another view. And I think that, as well as what Jess is talking about, you know, the honesty and realism in politics, we also have to make sure that politicians take out that echo chamber effect, because I think it's causing some distortion in some of the issues we talk about in Parliament. Because, you know, too often people think that what they're seeing on their Twitter feed may be in some way reflecting the reality in their constituencies, and I think that's a mistake not to be made.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. My husband refers to it as the internet leaking. He says the internet's leaking over your work again, Jess. Like, this isn't a real, like, and you can see some things that happen from all sides, like ideas that come up, and you just think, I'm not sure anyone is actually talking about this outside of Twitter. I just don't think that this is an issue. Certainly, like, you know, sometimes I will have a terrible day and it will feel like the whole world is crushing down on you in that echo chamber because you've said or done something, and you'll walk into the local Asda and obviously nobody has heard of what is happening.
Yeah. I'll pursue that in a second. I should say that to those who've joined us, that we're open for questions and answers later, and I'll put as many as I can, and I'm seeing one or two coming in already. That is a problem, Maria. There's also the abuse that women MPs get. Every woman MP that I've ever talked to gets, it seems to me, I mean, I don't know if anybody's done a study of it, much more abuse on social media than male MPs. Is that true?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. I mean, all MPs get abuse, and in many ways that's part of the job, to listen to other people's views, and sometimes people don't put their views forward in a way which is perhaps the way they talk to you if they saw you face to face in the street, or maybe they would put them in a forceful way if they saw you face to face in the street. But ultimately, women MPs, but particularly women from ethnic minority backgrounds, get a particular level of abuse, particularly on social media. And this is something which we actually debated very recently in the House of Commons, because whilst you could say, well, it's you know, that's the way it is, you should just accept it, and in fact, you know, when these things, when the abuse of MPs is brought to the courts, often judges say that's part of public life. But unfortunately, when it comes to women, it puts women off from standing for election. And so I think we have to challenge the fact that it's part of public life, because if it means that half the population is much less likely to stand for election, then it's really not a good thing for our democracy. And I often look at my colleagues on the benches opposite the Labour Party, and I'm extremely jealous of the fact that they have half of their MPs as female. But when you look at the breakdown, a lot are backed by unions, which obviously I don't have in my party. And we find in the Conservative Party lots of women saying, well, I don't want to put myself forward because of the level of abuse. So I think we have to tackle it. But just by way of reassurance, yes, it is really bad for some people, and it's sort of horrible, and it's there in the background, but it doesn't stop us doing our jobs. No. And nowadays, unlike perhaps when I joined, there is far more support there. And that really matters, to know that you've got technical and police support if you need it.
Yeah, Jess, I mean, I often wondered whether getting rid of the anonymity on Twitter, for example, would help. But other people I've talked to say, no, there's obviously a downside in that. Some people come on Twitter and feel they can express themselves, and they're vulnerable in other ways. So I don't know what, there's obviously no easy answer. Do you have any thoughts? Because it's not.
I think that we shy away from regulation because there's no easy answer. I also think that the internet it's sort of like the horse has bolted, and how easy it is to regulate now. But it's just not an excuse not to try. Personally, I think that the anonymity thing is a real problem. And I'm not suggesting that I need to know who you are, but somebody should. So if people want to live their lives and have a different experience and be able to be themselves in Facebook groups or whatever it is, then that's absolutely knock yourself out. But it should be in a manner that is traceable, because it's harrowing when and you never know whether real life things that happen to you have anything to do with that, and therein sets further fear, because you just don't know. But I mean, as Maria said, it puts people off. The worst things I've ever seen about it, and this usually happens around votes that are about war and peace, and certainly in some of the Brexit votes, you just knew that the abuse that some people were getting, not pressure from their constituents, but like really the internet leaking into their lives in a bad way. There were some people who would almost certainly have changed the way that they voted because of it. And so it is a perversion on our democracy across the board. And some people listening to this maybe go, oh, well, that's your job. You've got to listen to people's views and act accordingly. But if it's out, that's fine. If it's out of considered thought and debate, it's not fine if it's out of fear. Either the fear of the loss of your job, or the fear, because there are some things that if all my constituents, for example, wanted to bring back hanging, and they were going to not elect me if I didn't vote for that, I still wouldn't vote for it. So I can face down fear of not of losing my job on decisions that I make politically, but the fear that sort of reprisals of one form or another that becomes sort of an amorphous blob. Making you change your vote, that is perilous. That is a perilous situation to be in, and that's why. And I think that without anonymity, some of all the bots that seems like a crowd, and it's actually just one person and 12 bots saying the same thing to you over and over again. I think that would really help people have a better perspective, a less skewed perspective on that.
Maria, did you want to come in on that? Because I mean, that is one of the areas of poison in our politics that we could perhaps deal with a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, the online harms bill is something I'm campaigning on, and to address that issue of anonymity, because I would actually go one step further than Jess and say I think it would actually help make the internet a nicer place if people were honest about who they are. Now, I have to say, most of the people who I deal with on the internet, I do know who they are, and we have good reasoned debates and discussions where necessary. But if you don't know who people are, then, if people are allowed to go onto the internet in an anonymous form, then I think that affects people's behaviour. Did a piece recently with Thierry Henry where we were talking about the impact it has on footballers, reading, quite abusive things online, racist things online, and how that affects society more generally. So I do think having verified accounts, still having the ability to have anonymous accounts, but having verified accounts would help also improve behaviour on the internet. And let's use it for what it's great at, which is bringing people together, rather than creating animosity and hatred, which is so destructive.
Mm.
Could we talk a little bit about an area where you clearly cooperate, and you both alluded to it in different ways, which is essentially various gender issues and also the appalling lack of convictions, Jess, about rape and violence against women. Would it help to go back to something you were saying earlier, to say these things are very difficult, we get that, we're never going to have a perfect solution? Or would that result in people saying, oh, come on, you've got to try harder, you've got to do more? I'm not quite sure what's the best way of presenting a really difficult problem, which there are no easy solutions for, but we need to do better.
I mean, the solution in regard to violence against women and girls is for women to have equal power in society. So it's quite a long game, and so the policies that myself and Maria might work towards we're only ever dealing with the problem. We're not, actually the solution lies in both in education, which we all hope to see in the future, but we're 20 years out from that hopeful improvement. But the stuff that we do about wanting more refuge places, wanting better access to services, wanting to widen and improve police action in this area, all of those things that we would seek to be campaigning on, that's all we can do until women have an equal status in society. But look, I don't think that there is ever anything. I mean, they put a man on the moon 30 years before I was born, so I don't think that there is anything that we should ever say, well, this is just too complex. But there has to be a reasoned understanding that change takes time, and that it can feel like, I remember saying to Harriet Harman once, I said, I just don't know how you've tolerated all these years. Like, I just feel so impatient for things to change. And she said to me, when I was first here, Jess, I ran an 8-year-long campaign and was only successful after 8 years to allow women's hairdressing to happen in the barbers at Parliament. She was like, it took me 8 years to allow them to have women to have their hair cut by the barbers in Parliament. And that was a sort of shot across my bows of my sort of desperate need to change things. And Maria and I both worked on the domestic abuse, what is now an act, which seemed to take so long to get to the point. So you have to be honest about the processes. And where there isn't the political will that is pushing something that it should, that's the point at which you can attack and criticize governments. But you being honest about the fact that rape convictions, it is going to take a huge and multi-layered range of things to improve that, and some of that will take 20 years, some of it could be done in one. And there's a huge range in between. You have just got to be honest about that. It's when you say you're going to do something about it, and then the next year the figures are even worse than they were the year before, that it gets maddening for people like Maria and I who want to see change.
Maria?
I'd sort of build on that a little bit and say, I think one of the biggest challenges is, people like Jess and I sitting on, well, actually, you're on the front bench, aren't you, Jess? But, not in government, come up with lots of things we want to legislate on. But the thing that ministers know is that legislating is only the beginning. And if you take something like the situation on rape now, and, the need, if you can pass as many laws as you want, but unless the police, the CPS and victim support are in place, properly structured, coordinated, then the legislation is sort of for naught. And I think that that is one of the important lessons of government is, you know, it isn't just about the legislation, it's about the delivery as well. But there is legislation that's really important that, you know, signals huge change and huge evolution. And I think the one that I think about whenever I want to perhaps give myself renewed energy is the Equal Marriage Act. Because although that was just an act of parliament, it fundamentally changed lives and it changed people's views and it changed the lives of people who previously had not really been able to be part of all of the parts of society, and marriage is part of the way society works. And you know, it didn't require huge, well, it did actually require a lot of change, but it was done quite easily. And it made a profound change. But something like the Domestic Abuse Act will only really bite if it has all of the structures and processes in place and funding necessary to make it work. And that can be quite, you know, quite disheartening when legislation is passed and then actually it doesn't create as much change as you'd hope.
Can I bring in
can I just add something to the benefit of the Equal Marriage Bill is that I think it changed people's minds as well. Not just people's lives. I think that more so than most, lots of bits of legislation that get through, I think it changed that people who didn't agree with it when it came through, I think the vast majority of people realise that they're just as married today as they were the day before if they are heterosexual.
You're preaching to the converted there, Jess. I was the minister who took it through and I had a lot of people telling me their marriage would be worth nothing. And I'm glad to say that that wasn't true. And actually many of those people who voted against it then have changed their minds. So I think it was very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions coming in. Let me put a couple together. Alex Wilkes is saying to both of you, do you think politics is more divisive than when you joined Parliament? And an anonymous attendee says, where do you think the hostility in modern day politics stems from? So where does it come from and is it worse, Jess?
It's not worse than when I started. I think my husband often accuses me of kicking over something or accidentally pressing a button in the crypt of Westminster. She's like, since you've been there, it's been absolutely awful. Loads of really terrible things have happened, and he holds me entirely responsible. So it's not got worse. In some regards, it's got better. I'd say since I've been there, that I mean, obviously, within the first year of me being there, one of my friends and colleagues was murdered. So, and I have seen a huge advancement in the systems demanded largely by the women across party in Parliament to improve experiences for people who are working in politics generally. And whether they bite quite as well as we would like them to, yet they're definitely better than they were when I first arrived. I remember arriving in Westminster and I had to go to these different tables and like talk about how you employ staff and do this, that, the other. And I said, oh, well, where do my staff complain if I'm awful to them? And the woman just looked at me totally blankly. And I was like, well, that can't be right. And that there are improvements in that area now. So I'd say that there have been some improvements. What has caused it? It to be so, I think it's always been brittle. Truth be told, politics is a brittle game and you shouldn't think otherwise. But I think that the sort of availability and the ability of people to communicate much more readily with many different mediums and sort of the idea of citizen journalism as well, like everybody has a platform, is one of the best things that has happened. But it comes with this sort of crowd potential for sort of brutality. But I don't think in Westminster itself that it's more brutal. I don't think it's more brutal between the political parties, and I don't think that has been made better, worse, or I think it is just as it is actually.
Maria, I mean, obviously, and partly Jess alluded to it there, the country is divided on various issues. And people feel very strongly about a lot of things, from Brexit to trans issues to whatever. So it's hardly surprising if Parliament has divisions. But is it worse? And if so, where does it stem from?
I don't think it's worse, but it's different. And I think it's different. I think, as Jess said, politics has never been an easy option. It's never been something for the shy and retiring, really. You've got to be ready for the rough and tumble of it. But I think that the particular, and certainly within Parliament now, I would go one stage further and say that people are ever so polite to each other now in a way which I'm not sure I remember back in 2005. But it's that's within the House itself. Probably because we do have a lot more sort of ways of complaining about each other if we do misbehave, which probably helps. But I do think certainly issues around Brexit certainly changed the temperature of the water, and doesn't matter which side of the debate you're on. It created division within parties, it created division within friendships, it created division within families, and I think that we still see somewhat played out in some of the discussions that go on. We've got to move past that, haven't we, as a society, and we've got to get on with it. But I think that for the last, and it has been 3 or 4 years, that was top of the agenda, that sort of that difference of opinion did turn into hostility, and I think it really brimmed over into our everyday work, and as a result, on my side, I lost a lot of really good colleagues, which was a real shame. People who decided to leave politics as a result of it, and I think that was a real loss. So I'm not saying that's the only place that it comes from. Social media's got a role to play too, but certainly that did change the temperature of the water considerably.
Yeah, Maria is exactly right about some of the lost colleagues from her side. I could literally cry almost every day that Anne Milton is gone. She and people like Margot here in the West Midlands, like really, really decent, good colleagues who always sought to work collectively without question and do the right thing, and sort of had some real class lost, I think, in that division.
Do you think if more people heard that around the country, that would maybe just a little tick of a minuscule up in the way in which we would be more civil to each other, perhaps, Jess?
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, I think that in reality, people aren't being, like, even over Brexit, and I represent a seat that voted 63% to leave, and I was very, very passionately Remain and campaigning for a second referendum and I didn't feel terrible hostility towards me from my constituents, I have to say. And so I think that we've got to, the country has got to, it's often in the moments of division, and now we haven't got Brexit so much although arguably there's still a long way to go, but without that sort of binary, people will try and invent binaries just to have bad faith, and like, it doesn't matter what I say on a subject, there will be some people who would just be like waiting for me to say anything, and so that they can disagree with it, but not in real life, I have to say, not outside of the political sort of activist base of one side or another. Like in my constituency, like when I don't agree with people, they're like, oh well, fair enough. They're sort of reasonable normal about it. Yeah,
that's normal in normal life, though, isn't it?
Yeah, they're like, oh well.
Somebody disagrees with you. But one of the things which obviously we all broadly want the same thing out of is coronavirus. We want to get rid of it. We want everybody to be healthy. We want to make sure that that people don't die in hospital and so on. But even that, Maria, is something where people genuinely disagree. Is that debate ever anything other than useful? I mean, do you see that as something where we maybe as a country because we are working together on that has perhaps pushed Brexit and other more politically contentious issues to one side?
I think with the pandemic, it's been where people have wanted us to work together, and I think you go through Prime Minister's questions now, and I regularly feel sorry for the leader of the opposition because it's quite difficult. People in the nation want us all to have a common point of view. They don't want to see party politics get caught in the middle, but it is important to hold the government to account. And I think by and large, the vast majority of the population actually have a common point of view. You've just expressed it. We want to get rid of coronavirus. We want to move on. We want to do it safely. But you will have, as ever, on the edges, groups of people who have slight disagreements. Unfortunately, I have to say, through the way that that's maybe represented in the media or social media, it can look like those groups are bigger than they are. Certainly I can only take my post bag, but it's a reasonably sensible town in the south of England. People don't spend their time trying to wage war over whether or not we should be still having apps in place. They think that probably it's a really good idea that if you've had coronavirus, you stay at home, and that if you've been near to somebody who's had coronavirus, you stay at home, and that actually if people are working in the health service, they should get a dispensation and they can test every day. But you go onto social media and there will be groups of people who feel passionately about their liberties being infringed. Some in the House of Commons as well, but the vast majority of people actually have been quite united on this, I think.
Yeah, that is a quite an important distinction, because I hear different views about lots of things. I don't hear hugely different views about coronavirus, to be honest.
No. No, I think that Maria is exactly right. Most people are just hoping for the best, aren't they? And just trying to muddle their way through in a very human way, getting something's right, something's wrong. And I think that it is a very humanizing, and a universal experience like that is uniting. But yeah, I think that the amount that gets overplayed about people who are like anti-mask, I mean, I don't think anyone's written to me and said, how dare you? You're infringing my liberties, making me wear a mask. And what I felt like did say to some MPs who felt that way, it's like, you want to try wearing a bra all the time, mate? If you think that's a pain in the bum, it's considerably more uncomfortable. And he was like, but you have a choice. I was like, I don't. Society doesn't allow me that choice. Just like, but mostly that it's a fringe view. Most people are perfectly happy to pop on a mask when they go around the supermarket and understand that it's for the greater good. Most people want the greater good.
Yeah. On that note, a couple of other quick questions that have come in. Matt Brown says, should there be training in Parliament to help MPs with working outside their tribe? I mean, you both managed to do it, but would it help, Maria, maybe you were told, in these committees, it's all right to have a consensus about certain things. Is there some kind of training?
Select committees wouldn't work unless there was consensus, because otherwise, there is an ability to produce a minority report, but nobody actually ever does that, because why would you? Why would you just produce two sets of opinions? You might as well have a debate. You want to get something where you can find commonality. So in fact, the training is already there. It's on the job training. It's called being part of a select committee. But also all party parliamentary groups can only establish themselves if they have a common set of things they're trying to do. So I run a number of APPGs looking at different issues, and part of the online harms bill APPG, where we're looking at how that bill could be better, and we're finding where the common areas are that where we agree there needs to be change. And that is sort of already part of the way we work. But I think training is a really interesting thing for parliamentarians, and I'm sort of an opinion that probably is a need for, I don't know whether I call it training, because you have to be slightly careful with people who are elected representatives, where we have to be independent. But I think the need to remind members of Parliament about things. I'm particularly interested in probity in public life, around the Nolan principles, and making sure that people are aware of those sorts of concepts, because a lot of members of Parliament now, people like me and Jess, well, particularly people like me who never thought they'd be parliamentarians, aren't steeped in this. We've not been in it for generations. And I think actually teaching MPs about parliamentary principles is important.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know that they need training to work together, because actually, by and large, that happens. The only times it doesn't happen where they're, you know, in behind the scenes, or even on the scenes, if anyone was actually watching most of the scenes, where we're all grown ups. You know, we're elected representatives. We know how to behave, especially if you've ever had a job. You don't like all the people who work at your job, or you certainly don't. And even if you like them, you don't agree with everybody who you work with in a place. So we are all capable, completely capable of working together. The only time I see that it really doesn't happen is when it boosts, and this happens on both sides. And I'd say for a spell it was much more prolific on my side, is the idea that saying you never work with the other side is just a clever thing to do to have to speak to your own base. And that's all it will talk to. It will only ever talk to somebody who already voted for you anyway. It absolutely doesn't speak to people who might be considering voting for you. But there's a bit of chest pumping, like, oh, you know, I would never work with somebody like that, sort of thing. You know, I mean, Maria and I were on a select committee together, and we were on that select committee with Philip Davies, who is a man who nobody would ever put me and Philip Davies in the same sentence, other than to say that we didn't agree with each other. But on that committee, there was, even though we would disagree on things, there was never a point where we could not find a way to make the recommendations suit what both of us sought to get out of that committee. And he would often, you know, we would end up at the same place, although we'd gone there by a very, very different journey, that he hated any sort of regulation on anything. But the sort of demanding of fairness is the same as what I call equality. He terms it something else. And if me and Philip Davies can work together on the same committee and sign up collectively to a set of recommendations, then anyone can work with anybody.
And I think just building on that, it's fairness and injustice, and Philip's a very good example of that. Members of Parliament, by and large, are in Parliament because they want to make their communities and the country a better place. We just slightly disagree with what that better place is and how you get there. But I was just reflecting while you were talking, Jess, about that session we had on sexual harassment with the man
with the lawyers.
Yeah, with the lawyers. Yeah. And Philip was like a Rottweiler. He was the best on the committee by a country mile, and we were talking about something deeply feminist, and he totally went for this man. And it was not in a nasty way. It was about fairness and injustice, and injustice is what really is, you know, the common denominator there.
Yeah. He was exceptional that day, and I was glad that having this sort of slightly, you know, sort of sledgehammer approach was having it on my side. I was glad of him that day. He was brilliant.
Right. Well, right. Let's move on to a couple more quick questions. Mark Kieran asks, would a switch to proportional representation encourage a more collaborative, less extreme form of politics? If so, might that persuade more women to stand for Parliament? I mean, obviously, we've been down that road before, Maria, about 10 years ago. People weren't that keen on it, but partly because constitutional reform is really quite boring to most people. Sorry.
I think any sort of local government or constitutional reform is something which, doesn't set people alight. But I think it is important. We're always looking for better ways to work together. And although I just don't think proportional representation is it, and I'm not sure why that would create any more working together than there is now. I just happen to think it would probably create more unstable governments and possibly, depending on what system you adopted, less of a link between MPs and their constituencies. And I think that's what's really magic about our Parliament, is that we all represent, well, soon to be 76,000 people. I currently represent 3,000 people, but you know, you've got that direct link back to your community, and you know, that very defined role of representation.
Well, Jess, I am told, however, by friends in Germany that they've had fewer chancellors over the past few years, many fewer prime ministers, that they do are forced to work together, and that does make them all. I mean, that's one of the arguments.
Of course. I agree. I think that there needs to be a more proportional system, and I think that the Maria alluded to the boundary redraw, because both Maria and I have double the amount of constituents as some people. So by that very token, our constituents' vote matters half. What somebody in that, there is some definite unfairnesses that go on in how the system currently works, and a proportional system based on potentially not dissimilar to the Scottish system on a sort of list base, but again, I don't think that necessarily makes people work together better. I think it means you have one powerful partner and somebody who compromises, taking that particular example. But I would never agree to be a representative in a system without a constituency. I would never want to be a list candidate. I have absolutely no interest in being a Labour Party representative and that alone. I am first and foremost a Member of Parliament for Birmingham Yardley and the people of Birmingham Yardley, and anything without that link, it just wouldn't interest me. It would just be boring. The best part of my job is my constituency. I definitely think there's what I don't like and what I hope to see a change in, and I actually think we will over the next 20 years. I don't like the idea of a safe seat. I don't like the idea that people can feel taken for granted in an area because their votes are banked. And I think that voters these days are much less tribal, and that is a good thing that will serve our politics well into the future. Because I think that voters are clever. They know how to tactically vote, as if they're all in some big WhatsApp group. They know what they're doing a lot of the time, and they don't need us directing them to do it. They can do it by themselves. And ultimately, I think that what they demand, nobody in my constituency has ever asked me to fight for proportional representation. And when the country demands it, they'll demand it.
Yeah. And then we might get it.
We'll do it, yeah.
We've only got a few minutes left. I just wondered, is there any magic wand? Is there any one thing or one or two things that would improve the politics in our country and improve the atmosphere? I mean, a couple of people have been suggesting more women elected to office would result in a less confrontational style of politics. Other people would point out that Margaret Thatcher and Golda Meir were hardly unconfrontational when necessary. So, yeah. And there's a number of others. So I don't know what you think, Maria. What would help? Are there any things that we could do that would make things a bit better?
Oh, more women elected, not just to Parliament, but in local government as well, will make a huge difference. And it's not only about the culture of politics and that the sort of the anger. It's also about the agenda. I mean, what's talked about in Parliament now compared with when I was elected just 16 years ago is hugely different. You would have never got people talking about the menopause, about period poverty, about a whole list, or even, domestic abuse. You've got to remember that was something Theresa May really championed throughout her time as Home Secretary since 2010, and really firmly put it on the agenda. Female genital mutilation, these were not things talked about. Having more women on the Labour side has really helped change that narrative. More on my side, but still nowhere near enough. So I'd say more women in politics, full stop, would be great. And journalism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. I would agree. I'm not sure. I totally agree. I think a more diverse group of people, and I suppose then in how the political parties select people, I think would be some manner. But you'd have to get them to all agree to the same thing, which when Maria and I did a committee on this, wanting to get them to all agree to. And it's funny because the members of Parliament are much better at agreeing than our party HQs are at agreeing with each other on things. But there is a sort of genuine, I'd say that there is an issue with how people get selected to be the candidates that then get elected, that runs on that can run on a sort of patronage in a way that doesn't necessarily end up with the best person for a local area to serve them. But definitely more women in politics will massively improve it, and not because of confrontation, because I'm one of the most confrontational people in Parliament, and I'm a woman. But it absolutely change. It doesn't just feminize the debate; it humanizes the debate, and people feel more able to talk about their experiences and the experiences of their constituents that they might have felt. Like Alex Shelbrooke is a Tory MP. There's almost not a week that goes by that he doesn't come and talk to me about some constituency cases that he is having, that because there is a woman in Parliament who is an expert in really quite difficult things, that this sort of big bloke feels he can come and sit down and properly chat with me about how it made him feel about, or how can he help somebody. Like that, more women there definitely massively improves the experience for the men and the women.
Well, thank you both. It's great to actually end on an optimistic note, and having started on an optimistic note, because both of you were incurable optimists. Otherwise, you wouldn't do what you're doing and spend so much time doing it, and 8 years to get a hairdresser. I mean, I will take that, among other things, away with me. Thanks to our two excellent guests, Jess Phillips and Maria Miller. This has been Across the Benches, produced in partnership with the Real Agenda Network and Compassion in Politics. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's try and make things better. Goodbye.